This is the last lesson, the third lesson in the proportional reasoning unit. Here we're just solving problems involving proportional reasoning, so problems involving ratios and rates. Okay, this is called a proportion. I have two examples here in these two boxes. A proportion is when you have two rates or ratios that are equivalent or equal to one another. And oftentimes in these problems, you're going to be missing one of the values. So in this problem here, we have 35 kilometers in 2 hours. We don't know how many kilometers in 6 hours. So X is just the unknown here. So one way to solve these problems is just to think about how these fractions can be made equivalent. And so if there is an easy way to convert one to the other using multiplication or division, then we can do that. So here I can see that 2 hours can convert to 6 hours by simply multiplying by 3. So then I'm going to do the same to the numerator. We can only do this using multiplication or division. Multiplication or division only. So just make an equivalent fraction using multiplication or division, and you want to do the same to the top and the bottom, or the numerator and the denominator. Okay, so here we would see that X is 35 kilometers times 3, which is 105. So that would be our final answer. Okay, method 2. If it's not obvious how one converts to the other. So here I have 2.4 liters, and I'm trying to think of how that might convert to 11.25 liters. It's not obvious to me. So in this case, I'm going to use cross multiplication. This is a great trick, multiplication. It works anytime you're trying to make two fractions equivalent and you're missing one of the values. So what you want to do with cross multiplication is multiply the two numbers that are across, diagonally across from one another. That's why it's called cross multiplication. So multiply the two numbers that are diagonally across and then divide by the number that's across from the X. Okay, so let's do that. So X is going to be equal to 11.25 liters multiplied with 32 kilometers. So we're multiplying the two numbers that are diagonally across, and then we are dividing by the number that is across from the X. 2.4. And you would just type that into a calculator and you get 150. Okay, so we're going to practice doing either of these two methods in a couple of more practical examples. Okay, so let's do the first one. So here it says the small bottle of pop is 665 milliliters and the large bottle is 2 liters. So 2 liters, by the way, is 2,000 milliliters. Use a proportion to determine how many sugar cubes the larger bottle has. Pop has a lot of sugar in it. So here, if we count these up, there's 30 sugar cubes contained in the smaller bottle. We want to figure out how many cubes the large bottle has. So let's set up a proportion. They're made of the same pop, so they're going to have equivalent ratios of sugar to pop. So in the first one, we have 30 sugar cubes in 665 milliliters. And in the second one, we don't know how many sugar cubes, so I'll just use X. But I know that the volume is 2,000 milliliters. Okay, so we've set up a proportion. We've set our two rates equal to each other, and now I want to solve this. And it's not obvious to me how 665 would multiply to make 2,000, so I'm going to use cross multiplication. So remember, in cross multiplication, we multiply the two numbers that are diagonally across from one another. Okay, and then we divide by the number that's across from the X. So we're going to divide by 665. So let's write that down. X is going to equal to 30. I'm not going to write the units. 2,000. So 30 multiplied with 2,000 divided by 665. Notice I'm using a little dot for my multiplication. That's because x is involved here, and I don't like to use the other multiplication symbol because it looks too much like an x. Okay, and I'm just going to type that into my calculator, and I get 90.2 sugar cubes. So the large, which is a ton of sugar, that's crazy. The large bottle, can't spell large, let's erase that, has about 90.2 cubes of sugar contained in it. Okay, there you go. All right, so kind of process for all of these types of questions is you want to set up your proportion first and then solve it. You can solve it by making an equivalent fraction, or you can solve it using cross multiplication. I forgot to finish my highlighting here. So this, you're multiplying the two numbers that are diagonally across and then dividing by the number that's left behind, or the number that's across from the x. Okay, let's go to the next one. You can pause the video here and try this one on your own if you like. It says 1 Canadian dollar is worth about 0.71 US dollars. If you order some shoes online that cost 120 US dollars, how much will they cost you in Canadian dollars? Canadians know this type of problem well. We're often buying things from the US and trying to figure out how much they cost in Canadian dollars. So let's set up our proportion. So we're told that 1 Canadian dollar is 0.71 US dollars. So let's write that down as a rate. Canadian dollar, you can abbreviate it CAD. Actually, it's CA and then D, like that. Or actually, I think it's often just all capitals. Yeah, that looks right. Canadian dollar. And then it's worth 0.71 USD, US dollars. Okay, now when we make it equal, we want to keep it consistent. So I'm having Canadian dollars on the top. You could have written this the other way around. It's totally fine as long as you keep it consistent. So I'm going to have CAD on the top and USD on the bottom. Okay, so I know my shoes are 120 USD. I don't know how many Canadian dollars they are, so I'm going to use X there. Now we're going to solve, and I'm going to solve using cross multiplication again. So I'm going to multiply the two numbers that are diagonally across and then divide by the number that's across from the x. 1 times 120 divided by 0.71. So I multiplied the two numbers that are across, divided by 0.71. And if you plug that into a calculator, you'll get about, I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places because often our money is only 2 decimal places, Canadian. So we can see the shoes are about $167. So the shoes, I'm going to write a little sentence here, cost 166.67 Canadian dollars. All right. So again, the steps for all of these questions are set up your proportion. It's important that you keep consistent with the units matching. So if you have Canadian dollars on the top in one side, you got to have Canadian dollars on the top on the other side. And then you want to solve using either making equivalent fractions or by cross multiply. That is the end of the lesson.